All right, welcome. Thanks for joining for the LinkedIn Live today. I'm with David Hose, founder of House Advisors. And today we're going to be talking about can trust be a market differentiator? If you're joining us live, it's always more fun to get a little bit of audience interaction. So if you're joining us, let us know where you're tuning in from. Just write in the comments. And if you have any questions or thoughts, or you think that we're crazy and you want to put your 2 cents in about why one of us is wrong or something like that, then jump in on the comments and keep it lively. So yeah, David, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate you jumping on.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about trust and just talk shop about all that.
Yeah, so in the marketplace today, there's all kinds of different ways to try to get in front of people, and companies are always talking about how do you differentiate yourself, how do you get in front of the right audience, and so from your standpoint, where does trust fall in that? Like, can trust be a differentiator for your company?
I'd say I think about trust as kind of like it's a lubricant to sales. Um, I think the less trust that you have with your audience, the more friction you've introduced into the process. And I think, maybe if you're selling a really cheap product, you're an e-com store or something like that, maybe you don't have to build as much trust. But the more expensive something gets, I think the more trust is a necessary ingredient to bringing in that sale.
Yeah, so why do you feel like trust makes such a big difference? I mean, I agree with you. Like, if you're selling a $300 widget, can building trust make a difference? Yes, and if you built some big personal brand and you get trust, that's great. But you could also just run a ton of paid ads and get people to buy your product that way. And so, it is possible to buy something, but once you get up to that, you know, whatever, $2,500, 5,000, 10,000, obviously depending on the level of company you're selling to, and will vary how big of an impact that dollar amount has. But the higher up you go and the more expensive, the more that trust comes into play. But why do you feel like trust makes a difference?
I think a big part of it, honestly, is just kind of how the market's evolved and how people buy nowadays. I think, it's really easy for people to say one thing and then do another. And I think that's including brands. Brands will promise one thing, and then when you go and you get the final product, or you get, start with the service, you get something else. And so I think people have slowly developed an inherent mistrust of companies out there, which I think is why there's been more of this shift towards um, building personal brands and things like that, because people don't necessarily want to do business with an impersonal brand. They want to do business with a human being. And if, if they've followed somebody over time and they've learned more about how they approach things like that, that's going to help build that trust. And they're going to be more inclined um, to move forward with that person. Oh, I think you lost audio.
Geez. I think after doing this for a while, I'd remember that I put myself on mute. One thing I'm going to insert here that's, we didn't put this in our questions that we were going to talk through, but I think it's a good spot for it. So you're talking about how companies are not always doing what they say, and they'll make a lot of promises through marketing or through sales that break trust. And that's part of why it is a differentiator. What are some of the activities that you've seen companies make, either from the marketing or the sales side, that you feel breaks trust?
I think it's honestly, like any sort of mismatch between what is promised on the front end and what's delivered on the back end. So over promising, under delivering. I also think there can just be like kind of reputational harm when it's like maybe, you hear about people complaining about something online. It's like, oh, um, I bought this, and when I got it, it didn't look like what it was supposed to, and I tried to return it, and they said, "Oh no, all sales are final." Like there's things like that where even if you have a product that maybe there are occasions where it might break or something like that in transit. If you have a reputation for just saying, you know what, like we're going to make it right, whatever goes wrong on your end, even if we have to eat the cost, that's much more of a human, like not just all out for the dollar. And at the end of the day, and that's gonna engender more trust and honestly keep your reputation strong with your target market.
So, I mean, you've been doing this for a while, marketing and helping companies build trust through the content they're creating or through their marketing. And so, when is the time that you've worked with a company or you work for a company where you've seen building trust make deals move faster, or you've seen trust be a real differentiating factor in what you're doing?
Yeah, I think honestly one of my favorite stories is around kind of an event strategy that involves kind of building trust or leveraging trust. Um, it was at an agency I used to be at. We partnered with a number of other agencies to host an event for a shared uh, ideal client profile. So we all had a lot of client types in common, and we hosted an event, not a huge one, maybe less than 100 people, and um, each CEO took turns presenting at this event, and each agency had brought some of their own existing clients with them to that
Mm,
event. So each CEO got up and got to present for a little bit. And the great thing is that whenever there were conversations in between sessions, you'd always have a mix of people who were kind of intrigued by what was just presented, as well as two or three, current clients that might be part of that discussion. And so the amount of um, trust that could be conveyed through word of mouth from somebody who was actively using them
mm.
made the process of like warming up those potential clients go so much faster. And we'd regularly come back from those events with 3 4 warm leads, like people who heard really good things, heard directly from the CEO, and they're like, oh yeah, I definitely need this, and let's chat.
Yeah, that's huge because I know for a lot of agencies or even consulting companies kind of fall in a similar realm where you're selling some kind of a service, whether it's marketing services or any other kind of service. uh, they can have a really hard time getting case studies. I know when I've worked both as an in-house marketer and on client accounts, clients are very hesitant to share success stories because sometimes they feel like it's kind of their secret sauce, and they're willing, they want to help you how they can, but or they don't want their clients to think that they're trying to get one over on them by hiring a marketing. I don't know, whatever reason they have,
Yeah.
it can be very difficult to get case studies, and so that's a really interesting way to do it because you're basically bringing your clients into the same room as somebody who hasn't worked with you yet, and giving the opportunity for them to talk about you and talk about how awesome you are. Um, that's pretty cool. I like that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I think it was an experiment, but it was wildly successful. And so we ended up doing multiple like regional events in different major cities, wherever we had, wherever the agencies in common had uh, concentrations of clients. So it worked out really well.
So you guys were putting on these events with these other agencies?
Yeah, so it was actually a close partner of ours that was playing host. They had more of the resources to do all the event planning side of things, um, but it was kind of the brainchild of our CEO and that partner agency. And yeah, it basically kept on going. I think up until the pandemic, and the pandemic, for obvious reasons, kind of hampered it. But I think the principles still work, and honestly, I think the playbook would still work nowadays. Um, an intimate event with people who really just want to improve their business, and then bringing a variety of experts that aren't like competing with each other; they're just complementing each other. It's just a really good setup for priming like word of mouth and building trust really quickly.
Yeah, and when you bring people in person like that, there's serious impact to meeting in person. And I mean, even just thinking back over the years to some of the people that are most willing to get in my corner, they're people that I met in person years ago, just over coffee, learning about their business. I mean, I'll just shout out Brian Wallace. He's local here in Cincinnati, and back 8 years ago, I just reached out to him. He's successful, and I was like, "Hey, I'm getting started in this marketing area in Cincinnati. Would you be open to grabbing coffee?" And he goes, "Yeah, for sure." And then, I mean, this week he's made some introductions for me, and I've helped to support different things he's doing. I brought him in to different accounts that I've been working on before, and gotten him business. So just meeting for coffee like that in person, that goes super far. And even though I think you can build those relationships online, and I mean, my whole business is kind of focused around how to do that and how to have some of those same kinds of connections that you get in person, but still there's just something about meeting together physically that can't be replaced by no matter how much connection you have through a Zoom call.
Yeah, I think it's honestly that's the, if you were gonna like rank them all as far as like, would be the top trust builder, it's probably like in person. There's no real substitute for that. But I think, yeah, it's kind of like if you can't do the in person, here are like some alternate, like less effective, but cumulatively, they can still be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm really loving right now is when you mix the two together. So, you invite somebody on to a LinkedIn Live, or you get on a Google Meet and you have a 30-minute chat, and you're building that rapport and that connection, and then you end up meeting that person in person down the road.
Mhm.
That accelerates that in-person meeting times 10, because you've already built the relationship, and now you're actually seeing each other in the flesh. And it's actually pretty fun when that happens. Like when you go to a conference and there's somebody you've talked to. Well, next week I'm planning to go down to Nashville, and I have a ton of people that I've met, and I'm going to this LinkedIn event. And so there's all these people that I've met and built relationships with through LinkedIn, and I'm going to see like 20 of them all in the same room, and it'll feel like I know them, even though I've never
Yeah.
met them before. But then going and meeting them in person, I mean, in my experience, that accelerates the opportunity to do business together significantly. And so it's, how do you find that sweet spot where you can do both? Because now I get to meet people from Nashville years ahead of time, build these relationships with them, and then when I go down there, now we're building that relationship in person.
Well, I think too, like one thing that's interesting, somebody who is a colleague of mine, like I basically had two colleagues at the same company that had different approaches to, like, if they went to a conference and they were trying to, quote unquote, network with folks. One of them would, immediately be talking about business and kind of like, here's the capabilities of our company and what we do. And would come back with like, well, we kind of had, one, maybe two conversations that could be beneficial. The other person would, he'd make conversation, but it would be like, these are my kids. They're, 2 and 6. And, oh yeah, I love this type of scotch, or I love, this hobby or whatever. And he'd come back with like 4 or 5 warm leads. And it's like, but he didn't talk about the business at all. But I think what you were talking about, like with the in-person stuff, I think part of what makes that build a lot of trust is that I think you probably end up talking about stuff outside of your professional, things that you're normally going to talk about. And so it's like you end up relating and trusting someone because you kind of, I guess, see more of a 360 view of who they are in person.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's actually interesting because I just wrapped up working at Proofpoint, and one thing is a remote agency, and I did actually meet most of my colleagues in person, but then we brought people on after we had our in-person event, and so there's people I've worked with for well over a year that I'd never met. And one thing that my boss Mike was really good at doing is when we get on our one-on-one calls, he would start off, and I don't think that this is naturally his personality. Like, I think if we asked him, he would say it's something he's had to work on, but it's doing the personal connection first. And probably if you just start doing that, it might feel a little bit ingenuine, but then as you develop that muscle, it becomes second nature to start out with like, hey, how are things going? How are the kids? Oh, you had a kid that was sick last week. How are they feeling? Whatever. And it really does just build so much more connection and rapport that way. And then we get into talking about business or whatever. But I think when you're having these relationships online that you're building through for work, it's really important to think about that and not lose that aspect. And one more piece on that I'm leaning into is as AI is becoming more of a thing, and it has and will continue to impact our world in marketing or sales or social selling or any of those aspects of what we're doing. What are the things that AI isn't going to replace anytime soon, probably ever, is that personal connection. Like you're not going to talk to ChatGPT and ChatGPT goes, "Oh yeah, I also went to the Grand Tetons last week or last year, and my kids love going here. Did you guys go visit this place?" Like AI can't do that. And in fact, I feel like as AI becomes more proliferated, there's going to be even more hunger for that in-person connection. So, as more people work remote and there's less connection, if you can build those human interactions with people, there's real value in that. And I think people crave having that kind of connection.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, it's kind of like, I think one of the examples I like to use is, even when you're in the office together, um, there's always like the water cooler conversation, which was like, all these professionals getting together in an office. You'd think all we're going to talk about is professional stuff. And there is, a large portion of it is just professional related chatter. But there's also just like talking about the sporting event that you guys watched the weekend prior, or, you know, what sort of hot, things you're going to be doing in the week ahead or something like that. Like there's a lot of different more sort of relaxed conversation that happens around the water cooler. And I feel like that is, I think more folks should think that that's appropriate um to bring to the table, when whether it's personal brand or in their, client interactions, in their, networking, whatever, like, kind of bring your whole self to the table, not just, kind of a wooden two-dimensional version that you want everyone to see.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting because for the last couple of weeks, I was taking this, he called it a course, but it's for like a theological study on something really specific. And I'm in this WhatsApp group and we're like talking about this specific thing and going back and forth for a couple months and like long sometimes it'd be like 50 messages in a day. And you're like, how do I keep up with this? It's ridiculous. But it's kind of diving into this topic with all these people that, we're disagree on a lot of things and we're, wrestling back and forth on an idea. And then the interesting thing is a couple times, including yesterday with the eclipse, people are like, jumping in with things that have absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about. And it's kind of nice because you're joining in on something that you do agree with, or that, brings personality to that person. Or, one time this guy was like, "Hey, I'm actually launching this YouTube channel. Check out my first video." It's totally not related to what we're doing at all. But then, I checked out his video and it's actually somebody that I probably had the most heated discussions with in the group. And it gives me insight into who he is as a person and some of the things outside of our discussion. And it's interesting how people even gravitate towards that human connection in any kind of forum that they'll get, and looking for ways to make those real connections with people. I know we kind of this is not really the direction I think we were planning to go in the conversation, but I think it's really relevant because even when we're online, it's like, okay, we can put our perfect selves out there. We can, always post the selfie where, it makes us look the best. And I'm not going to hate on that. But at the same time, I think the more that we can focus on being on video, connecting live with people, mixing that with in-person events, I really do think that that's good. Not only is it a differentiator now, but I think as time goes on, text is so easy to copy, so easy to manipulate. It's easy to throw something in ChatGPT and create some. I mean, you're not going to create something epic, but create something that you can just put noise out there. But much more difficult to replicate that on video and and it's much harder to create that personal connection and interaction with people.
Yeah, I mean, I know this is a buzzword, but I think it's kind of true, especially in the age of AI, is it's authenticity, you know? And you can manufacture what seems like authenticity, which kind of defeats the purpose, by definition. But I think it's true. It's like, I think, as AI is, going to be producing more stuff that looks technically perfect, you're going to be like, well, was this thing, this social post written by AI, or was it written by a real human being? It's like, well, actually, it's going to be the stuff that's like, oh, there's a typo in that. I bet you they actually wrote it. Or, oh, in the video, there's more ums and uhs in their, conversation. There's more like things that make us human, like
They
the
didn't have perfect
imperfections
eye
in.
contact the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. Like you see some of these things that have been produced by AI, and you're like, that looks like a human, but it's like it's robotic,
It's
and
missing something.
and I mistrust it. Just kind of once I see that, it's so funny to me when I see folks talking about like this might be how we market in the future, and I was like, marketers will ruin everything. Take something like AI and be like, how can we kind of like use this for a little while until it like everyone mistrusts it because of how people used it. So I think authenticity is the way to go. Being relaxed, and yeah, I think just being, I guess moving into another related topic. I think generosity is a great way to build trust. I think this kind of gets into a lot of stuff that you talk about, but it's really about kind of being a connector, being, um, you know, uh, generous with your insights and learnings, and being helpful to other folks. Creating content with them, things like that, that can, um, it shows that you're not just there in a transactional way, just to like, hello, now will you pay me money? It's more of like, hey, hello, let's get to know each other. Let's see if I can provide you value. Maybe I can, make some connections to my network, things like that. I think those are great things for building trust.
Yeah, and on that point, I've heard people talk about the oh man, now the word's completely slipping my mind right as I'm about to say it. But that the idea of like, oh, the law of attraction, and you hear these like speakers that sometimes can be a little bit bigger than life, and they're saying all this crazy stuff, and then you hear him say something like law of attraction, it feels kind of woo woo. It's like almost borderline being like spiritual, and the people that follow him are all a little bit cult like, and you're like, how does that really work? But the interesting thing is with that law, the idea of the law of attraction, I think it has a lot more relevance than what I've wanted to give credit for, and being generous is the best way to attract the kind of people that are worth working with, and where you really have meaningful connection. I think the reason is you end up attracting people who share the same mindsets and values that you do. So if you're generous to other people, and you're looking to add value first, and you're going to extend trust more quickly, and you're going to be somebody who is trustworthy, when you live that way, you're going to attract people who are like that, and you're going to repel people who aren't. So it's not only that you are going to end up attracting people who are going to spend money with you, but you're attracting people who are going to be better long-term clients. They're going to give you the benefit of the doubt when you do something wrong, or you miss a deadline, or whatever. They'll be more understanding. So it's not only attracting more clients, but it's attracting more people that will be raving fans, or be in your corner, and kind of be looking for your best interest. And I think the reason is cutthroat people don't want to work with people who are willing to be generous, because it's so against their nature. They might see that as being weakness, or something like that. So I think there's a lot of value to being generous, and attracting the right kind of people to work with you.
Yeah, and one like that article that I think I was referencing, I think the data bears it out. It's like, and I've also heard other stories, where it's like, oh, the used car salesman, they have like a stereotype for just being like, really slimy and high pressure, and then hear about a story about, oh, this one used car salesman, like all he did was just kind of like talk to people, and like if they left the car dealership, it's like, that's cool, whatever. he was not high pressure at all, and he was just like always keeping in touch with people. Um, if something came in that like was what they had mentioned 3 months earlier, he'd be like, "Oh yeah, something came in that might be like what you're looking for. Here's the info on it." And he was just like very, very low pressure, very upfront about things, and like he had like the highest numbers of all the sales people in like in his
Mm.
entire state or something like that. And um, yeah, I think it just highlights that sort of almost like the opposite of being transactional. Like, yes, at the end of the day, a lot of us are doing business with each other, but um, I think if you can aim for like going into the market with a generosity mindset, and and the results will come if you're just um, providing other people value. You know, it's like kind of the, I guess, law of reciprocity, as Robert Cialdini would probably say.
Yeah, and that's a really key point to me, and resonates with me, because one thing that I'm aiming for in building out a business, and what I want to help people do, is build a business that's built around your life rather than the other way around. So instead of having a business where you're going, "Hey, I'm going to try to make as much money as possible so that hopefully one day I can live the life that I want to live." Instead, it's like, well, what are the things that I value in my life, and what is work taking away from those things? And then when I'm thinking about that, how do I design a business that fits in with my life? So, for me, that's prioritizing my wife and my kids and my family, and being able to figure out a way. Obviously, I need to work, but also, being able to be involved in the things that are important, and be around for the things that are meaningful, rather than, okay, I'm going to work 90 hours a week and my kids aren't going to see me. And then when they're in their 20s, I'm going to retire and hope to have a relationship with them. It's not going to work that way. And I think,
Yeah,
with generosity, it's kind of the same. If you have those mindsets and you're building that out, you're going to be able to it's kind of doing that same thing. It's saying, who are the kind of people I want to work with, and how do I attract them? Well, if I want to attract trustworthy, generous people, then I need to be trustworthy and generous myself, and I'm going to attract those people. And then trustworthy and generous people trust you more. They pay you more.
yeah,
They pay on time, and they're going to be more gracious when you go, "Hey, my kid's sick. I'm going to end up needing to cancel this meeting today." And they'll be much more generous to you in those circumstances, as long as you're also doing the same thing for them.
yeah. Well, I think, like bringing it back to like selling professional services or whatever. I think at the end of the day, um, especially in a services business, your product is people, you know? So you can try all sorts of other things. You can try paid ads, you can try SEO, and, whatever it is. Um, but I think if you try to do a lot of those things with the absence of personal relationships, you're going to have an uphill battle. And that's where I think, and why trust I think is so central to kind of how I approach marketing and agencies is like, look, you need to remember that you're a group of people providing a service at the end of the day. So, being generous with your expertise, um, being generous with your, initial consult calls, things like that. Like there are people who've been very generous with me, um, just in like, answering questions about tax stuff or whatever. And it's like, okay,
Yep.
once I'm in a better spot, like I'm definitely gonna use you as my go-to tax guy, because you just spent a half an hour with me and didn't charge me anything, but you gave me a lot of help, a lot of help and value. And so I think if agencies and other service businesses kind of approach things with that mindset of, how can I be really, how can I provide a lot more value up front, um, even if they can't buy today, um, it's gonna build, and it's basically your, what's the word? You're kind of you're pushing that flywheel, you know,
Yeah.
and that flywheel is kind of like your reputation, your brand, whatever. Um, but it's gonna kind of, as it builds momentum, it's gonna bring in new people just by virtue of your reputation. Um, it might be a little more work up front, but it compounds over time.
Yeah, but I mean, does it really? Does it really take more work? Because I think that's a piece that we could argue, oh, it takes more work, but creating a ton of content to get inbound is an insane amount of work. Cold calling 500 people to land a client is an insane amount of work. Me inviting you to join me for a LinkedIn Live is not that much work, and then we build a relationship through doing something like this, or me going to an in-person event, or me going, to a group and sharing my knowledge. Like, does that really take a lot of work? I think it takes a different way of thinking, where you're letting things maybe come to you a little bit more than pressuring for something to happen. But getting business in
I see
any
what you're saying.
shape takes a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to like how set you are on, like, engaging with specific people. Like when you're doing that outbound stuff, you're like saying, okay, I know exactly who my ideal profile is, and I'm gonna just email those folks. But yeah, like, it doesn't build trust. Versus if you're doing something that's a little more organic, maybe more content based like this, that can be much more effective. I think I guess it's content. It's a quantity versus quality sort of question. Sometimes the quantity that you get, at the end of the day, maybe you email all these people, but only one or two actually responds. And then even then, because they haven't built trust with you, they might sign up and then, not be a long-term client, versus somebody who you've built a relationship with. Maybe they don't sign up right away, but maybe 3 months down the road, they sign up, but then they're around for like 2 years or something like that. And it's like, oh, it actually paid more dividends to kind of err on the side of quality than to try to, push for results now.
Yeah, and just real quick, I know we're like actually 8 minutes over what we had scheduled. So are you still good? Because I had to check with you for as we wrap up here. Are you still good for a second? Because we're over time, and I didn't actually ask you before we went over time. And we had a couple people join just as we were going to be wrapping it up. So I thought, well, hey, I'll keep chatting because I'm enjoying the conversation anyway. But yeah, and what I mean by that, I'm not really disagreeing you in that it takes work. It does take work, but I think that people say, oh, that takes a ton of work and effort, and I don't have the time. I need a closed business or whatever. But in my experience, and as I've interacted with people who do sales and who do more transactional marketing, if you really dig into it, it takes an incredible amount of work to do any of that. Like putting together an ebook that you're going to put out there and try to generate a ton of leads. I've built those out. They take an insane amount of work. And if it's going to be something that's truly valuable and you're adding value, I mean, it can take hundreds of hours to put something like that together. And if you're the only person and you're doing it for your own business and you're going to put it together, you're still probably talking about a minimum of 15 to 20 hours to put something like that together. That's going to be actually decent quality at all. That's worth downloading. And so that's a huge time investment. And then, same with cold calling or going and knocking on doors. It's an incredible amount of work. And then the flip side is, if somebody's not ready to buy right now, then they're not going to want to have anything to do with you. And in fact, they might have negative perception. But if you've been generous to people, and inbound can do that to a degree, like you provide some incredible amount of value through an ebook or a course or whatever, you can build that reciprocity. But when you figure out a way to build that relationship and connection detached from trying to close somebody on the first time that you talk to them, and you're going to let that business come to you, in my experience, you actually see things turn around a lot faster and deals close faster. That person might be open to sending you a referral today. And even though they're not going to work with you, they go, hey, you know what? I actually have a colleague that would really benefit from what you guys are, or, a peer former colleague that I used to work with. Let me make an intro to you for you. Or once you're done, you could use Sales Navigator and deep search their connections and find somebody that you do want to connect with and just ask them. And if you've added value and you've been generous to them, most people are going to say, oh, sure, I'll make an introduction, or you can reference me, or whatever. And so I've actually found that it moves faster, which is kind of counterintuitive. I think people assume it'll take longer and be more work, but I've found it to be actually the opposite.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I think you're winning me over to your way of thinking for sure.
Awesome. Well, David, thanks so much for joining me for the live today. And if you joined late, we'd already been talking for about 30 minutes. The recording will be live here as soon as we end it. So go back and listen. David shared some great stuff, especially about events and kind of mixing that, the value and trust that you can build through hosting an in-person event or participating in in-person events. And I totally agree with you on that. So yeah, David, thanks again for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been fun.